Um, Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shvis, Perek Ches, Halachet Daled. We're learning today Daf Soid, Daf Samach Daled. We left off Mamish on top of the Amid. We started to learn yesterday the concept of Halacha Shel Imum, which means obscure halachas, vague halachas. Vague meaning not that the halacha is vague, but the rationale behind certain distinctions that the Chachamim made in rabbinic law to rule leniently was something that we find vague, we find obscure, we find questionable. We understand that we were looking to find the leniency, and we acknowledge that we could have gone in the other direction, beginning with the halach of our Mishnah, the reisha of our Mishnah, based on the premise that the Mei Shvius is imbued with Kedusha Shvius. The cases of the reisha of the Mishnah is that a person Reuven tells Shimon, hey lach isur zeh, take this coin, ulekoit li yerek hayoim, and pick for me vegetables. So the Mishnah says that we don't view the isur as an exchange for the vegetable. If that would have been the case, then the isur, the money, the coin, also would have had now kedusha shvis. We do view the money as a payment for labor, and therefore it's mutter. And I'm going to come back to that later when we learn the daf inside, and that's something that's called obscure halacha shel imum. The next case that we had yesterday on Amud Beis is that even though one is not allowed to use Meiser Sheni as payment for anything, for a debt, if a person who wants to carry their Meiser Sheni to Yerushalmi, but they need help, if they tell a person, Halem, bring it up with me, Shenoichlem Yerushalayim, right? Without using the word lechalek, then we understand that it's a favor for a favor, not a payment. You do me a favor, you schlep it up. When I get there, I'm going to allow you to eat my Meiser Sheni produce. He's not paying for a service, favor for a favor. Again, that's something that we could have gone in the opposite direction, but the Chachamim Dafka wanted to be lenient. They wanted for people to be able to bring the Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim. Halachi shel imum. Today, we're going to learn two more fascinating halachi shel imum. We're going to touch in the second one on the topic of Pas Palter, of Pas Akum, and we had this discussion in the Masechtas Avodah Zarah and the Bavli. We're going to have a fantastic review of what used to be, what it became, and here also there's halachi shel imum. And after we close the two new examples of today, Reish Lakish will argue with the premise that our Mishnah's halacha is halacha shel imum. Reish Lakish actually holds that our Mishnah makes a lot of sense because he adds a nuance to the Mishnah. Rabbi Yechanan will argue with him. That is going to bring us into two other braisas that are parallel our Mishnah in other areas in halacha regarding a person telling a worker to do something. How we view that ask, how do we view the salary again, whether it's the money for food, whether it's money for labor. That has effect in two other areas of halacha. And if we'll have time today, we're going to focus on the end, on the seifa of halacha dalid. Over there is where a person walked into a bakery, and the person, at times we interpret that when he tells the baker, when he takes a loaf of bread, that kishe elkoit yarkoit sada, that when I'm going to pick today the vegetables or whenever, I'm going to bring to you some of the vegetables. Again, we don't view that person as paying for his debt to the storekeeper, to the baker, which is something that you may not do with ma'os or with product of shvi'is. We do, again, view it as a gift for a gift. In other words, I'm taking a bread. You're not giving me credit. You're giving me a matana. And I'm telling you that I'm going to give you a matana later. Today, again, that was permitted. To make it clear, all of these leniencies is only in rabbinic law. And that means that the premise of what I just said right now was based on the fact that Shemitah is noyeg midoraisa bisman shahayovel noyeg. Yovel is noyeg midoraisa bisman shekol yoshveh oleh. Bisman bayesheni, we didn't have kol yoshveh oleh. They did not count yovel, which means that all of the halachas of shvius is midrabanan. I'm just explaining what's the rabbinic over here, and that's why again they were lenient. They were more lenient. Actually, the Gemara is going to bring Tanoim that argue with our Mishnah's Tana, and they hold That's what Yakir was saying yesterday. What are you talking about? A guy goes into a store that gives on credit. That was the common thing until today. Retail stores sell on credit, groceries. Not everyone has cash right away. And we don't say it's a gift for a gift. No matter how he worded it, we say it's payment, and it's always going to be usher. We're going to have that in the Gemara, but let's begin Chevra and Daf Samach Dalid, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud. Okay, so we're going to learn many topics today, which is a good chazara of many different halachas. We're going to go now to a law in Hilchas Shabbos, and that is that there were many things that are not allowed to be done or said on Shabbos, Shema Yichtov, because the Chazal were afraid that a person might write a document. Writing is asan midoidaisa, and therefore certain things may not be done because you might end up writing a document, including Tanin and Taman. We learned over there, Masechta Shabbos, if a person needs to borrow wine or oil on Shabbos, to use on Shabbos, using the word halva'a, halveni is asur. Using the words hashileni is mutter. Perfect day. Halveni and hashileni both mean to borrow. I'm happy that Yakir is cringing his forehead because he thinks since he's Israeli, he understands the holy tongue. No, you don't. Makes it worse. Listen, guys, halveni is normally used by money. Hashileni is normally used when I'm borrowing an item that I'm planning to return. The item itself I'm planning to return. When is there a fear that when I borrow something on Shabbos, it might be documented? When the item that I'm borrowing is not that which I need to return, which is money. When you lend me, I'm not going to say $100. We're building a building. Now I need the millions of dollars. The joke is on us, guys. That's not a guzma. So when you have to borrow $1 million, really, you need a donation. But let's say you're not getting it, so at least you borrow the money for it, so the worker should keep on working. The guy who lends the money doesn't want that $1 million back. He wants $1 million back. If you're going to spend that money, you owe him the money. That's where people write a document. By a halva'a, by she'ela, I'm borrowing your car. That's when the term is used. Really, we're not afraid that someone is going to document it. Why not? Because we're speaking about honest people. I know that this car belongs to you. I'm going to give you this car back. I'm not using this car up that I'm going to be chayiv a new car. And the Chachamim, okay, period. Aleph, Beis, when I'm borrowing wine or oil, when I borrow wine or oil, I'm going to use it up. I'm not going to give you back this wine. Nevertheless, the Chachamim were lenient. And they said that if you use the word hashileni, since normally when you use the concept of hashileni, there's no isur midrabanan because there's no fear of shema yichtov. Even l'kavod Shabbos, I need to drink wine, I need to have oil. So they were lenient. Now, you can argue, why? Shema yichtov, if I can't borrow something, right? Halveni, who cares if I use the words hashileni? Who cares what semantic?
It actually fits also in modern Hebrew.
I'm happy that modern Hebrew.
You don't say tash'ili $100.
Okay, fine. I don't know, say that. No, I did. It's not that it never fits. I just know that the yisoid is the lashon hakodesh. Sometimes, okay. So tamon taninan. We learned in Shabbos. Shoel adam mechaveiroi. A person is allowed to borrow from his fellow, whether it is kadei yayin, whether it is jugs of wine, whether it is jugs of kadei shemen. He can do that. As long as he doesn't use the word halveni. So what should he use? He has the words hashileni. Now, what difference is there? In other words, the question is, I know the difference, like I explained. An item that's not going to be returned, an item that's meant for me to consume, for me to return something else, that is where sometimes people would document that loan. And there is a takana midrabanan. Don't do a transaction that might lead a person to writing. So just because you're using the word hashileni, it's not a real hashileni. Hashileni is when I borrow your car, when I'm returning your car, when I borrow your item. I'm borrowing your wine. I'm not giving you back this wine. And indeed, here again, that's another obscure halach, obscure meaning that the rationale is not so clear-cut. We understand that they were looking to be lenient. Why were they looking to be lenient? like he brings over here in the Rashirilio because of Oinek Shabbos. Beautiful. Yeah, imum means obscure. Now next, final halacha shel imum. So we had two yesterday, according to Rab Ze'eda b'Shem Rab Yonasan, that our Mishnah is one of them. We had two yesterday. We had a third now, and now we're coming to the fourth. Right? Iro daf samach dalid. Sod. Piton, bread. Then he's grabbing onto the wheel strong. He's about to get triggered. We're talking about paspalted over here. So let's go. Let's remember that we have in the many gezedas that the Chachamim made in Bavli, that's Avodah Zarah daf lamed hey. Not because I remember the daf, but because the Rashirilio writes the daf over here. So when they made the gezeda against having yayin stam, against having chalav akum, against having shemen akum, before they retracted that one, bishul akum, they also made a takana not having pas akum. By most of these gezedas, not all of them, by most of them, the primary reason behind that takana was called chasnus, was against intermarriage, with the concept that when you put certain boundaries, particularly when it comes to food. So if you make food in your house and you share it with me and I eat it, it brings a certain closeness of the families, and that can lead into intermarriage. And I want to tell you something that I heard, and I'll just to repeat it, that the Sfardim, who were very makbid in Bishul Akum, more than the Ashkenazim, because bottom line is, one of the ways we get out of the Bishul Akum, aside of, I'm going off on Bishul Akum for a second, there are three rules of Bishul Akum. Bishul Akum is only on something that cannot be eaten raw. Bishul Akum is only on something that's oil al shulchan melachim, however that's defined. It's not on all foods. I can have a coffee that was made by goyim. Okay, I can have a beer that was made by goyim. It's not on all products. But the most important one is that even if it is included in the prohibition, Ashkenazim, according to the Ramah, if a Jew was involved in any part of it, even only making the fire, it's already okay. By the Sfardim, no, a Jew has to be involved in the actual cooking of the food itself. It can be a minimum. It can be putting the pot on the fire. It can be stirring the pot once. But he has to be involved in that food itself. Bottom line is, because of that, because of their stringency, someone told me, there was a lot less intermarriage. And by Ashkenazim, your kid is not happy. Okay, it's okay. Say that.
I think
By the way,
we didn't want to date Muslims, the pitui wasn't so hard.
I don't think that's correct, but let's not get there right now. I
was going to say, when you order fish from Fish Grill, you can choose the Bishul Yisrael option, and then a Jew will put the fish on the grill for you.
That's the Shvardasha option. And I just, for the record, that most of the kosher restaurants here on Pico, here in LA, and Mestama in the East Coast, let me speak about LA, are not Bishul Yisrael for the Sfardim. I hate to say that. Okay, but anyways, coming back over here. I'm making people very upset. They're not coming back to the share. But let me go weiter.
When my son worked there, people would ask for Bishul Jewish hands. And
here's the problem. The problem is that even though you're saying that they asked to Bishul Yisrael for Sfardim, we paskin that if there was not Bishul Yisrael, the kalim have to be kashered. So what does it help if for my steak the Jew is putting it on in the oven or on the pan if the pan is already not kosher? But let me go now to pas. Pas is something that's very strange. There are certain. Let me word it like this. Ezra made 10 takanas, the famous 10 takanas, and one takana did not take hold. Right? Tfilas Ezra. Why did Tfilas Ezra? Just for the record, just we learned well. Or at least I still remember it, I think well. For a takana to happen, the Sanhedrin have to give up Sagdin, then people have to accept it. If it's a takana she'ein roiv hayitzibu yochaylim la'amid ba, if it was never fully accepted, generally in the Bavli we say it has to be undone. Elama, you don't need a bezdin that's gadol mechavede b'chachma u'b'minyan, but it has to be undone. Now, what happened with Pas Palter from our Yerushalmi, it doesn't seem like it was ever undone by a Beis Din. What happened with Pas, that Pas is even more staple than Bishul. It became so difficult for people to adhere to only having bread that was baked by a Jew. We're speaking all about kosher ingredients, make no mistake. Speaking about that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the ingredients. It's 100% kosher. Problem is that it was baked mitchilase v'ad sofer by a goy, and it was not accepted. And it became lenient. And we'll see over here, how lenient do we go? What are the questions of how lenient do we go? There are two questions of leniency. Number one, are we lenient b'poyel mamish only b'makim she'ein pas Yisrael mitzuya? There's no kosher bread. There's no Jewish bread, so we can be lenient. Or are we even lenient in a city like LA? That's question number one. Question number two is that, as we'll see, are we lenient even by a homemade baked bread from a goy? We're speaking about a goy that we know that the bread is 100% kosher in ingredients. Are we only lenient by a baker? Because since the primary reason is because of intermarriage is more shayach if it's a personal thing. I baked in my home. The goy baked lahavdil in his home. We exchange foods with each other. If a baker baked it, the baker is mass production. I'm not even buying it from the baker. I'm buying it in the supermarket. The reason of chasnus is very far removed. So the question is, how lenient are we? And this is part of the halachas of imum, that it's obscure, that one can argue with the leniency, as we'll see, but we see it was too difficult. It was too difficult to keep to the laws of the Gezerah of Pas Yisrael. Now let's read it inside. A piton regarding the bread of non-Jews. Again, Rabbi Yaakov Baracha b'shem Rabbi Yonasan. You see, it's b'shem Rabbi Yonasan. That's the commonality. Before it's Rabbi Zera, here it's Rabbi Acha. That what oid he mahalachi shel imum. Now we have to clarify exactly what did he mean. What part of it is not clear. Amar Rabbi Yosi. When I heard that regarding piton, regarding their bread, there's something obscure, is kashiyase kume Rabbi Yaakov Baracha. I asked him, you're quoting Rabbi Yonasan. Can you please clarify? Mahu ma'alachi shel imum. Let me, the two options. Kach ani omer. Kach means, do we say that the makim shepas Yisrael mitzuya, that when you can bake bread, let's go with Ashkenazim, that a Jew threw in a match. He threw in a little sliver of wood in the oven. That's all he did. Epis, something. I remember I grew up. There were years in Brazil when I was with pre-bar mitzvah, that my father was very angry with the bakeries that they charged too much money for staple foods. There's a typical type of my father type anger, taking advantage. So he would, in principle, even though he was making a lot of money, whatever you can buy from a non-Jew, he would buy, not from the baker. They're charging too much money. So he would throw a match into the oven that he made a bread called pãozinho. Pãozinho is for the Brazilians that are poor. It's flour and water. Flour and water. And that ovens that only made that. There was no kashrus issue. And then he would always announce in shul that he lit the fire. He threw a match in, and that's enough for it to be Pas Yisrael. And that's what happened. People bought a pãozinho, and instead of paying $4, they paid $1. Something like that. The difference between kosher and non-kosher is probably 400%. That's an average. For Pesach, it's 16 times more. Regular, that's why here in LA, they start selling kosher Pesach right after Purim. Why? Because why? That's why. If they can sell it from Hanukkah, they would do it from Hanukkah. Yeah, how ironic. Weiter. When you can get Jewish bread, then bedinu shetehei pashal goyim asura. Then, in other words, even though let's accept the fact that it was too difficult to keep. So if it's too difficult to keep, so therefore they were lenient on it. Be lenient when there's no other bread. But what happened is that the imimu allow the hitirua, that they went more. They said, you know what? People can't keep it. Let's go with if no one kept the takana, it never took hold. Let's go with that approach. You don't even have to undo it. So they said, even though the reason of chasnos is still there, but once they saw people didn't keep it, they decided we're going to let it completely run to the side. And that's the imum part, because if they wanted, they could have drawn the line in the sand over there. That's option number one. Option number two is in the opposite direction. That imum was they were more machmir. That b'makim she'ein pas Yisrael mitzuyam, that when you don't have bread and people did not accept it, So at least when you don't have Pas Yisrael Mitzuya, really, Bidinu Shetei Pas Akum Muteres. That is where you should be Matir Pas Akum. And maybe when they quoted B'Shem Rabbi Yonasan that Pitam, there's something obscure, something that they did that didn't make sense. Maybe it meant L'chumra, Fakert. In other words, the Gemara and the Yerushalmi really did not know. Bottom line, are we lenient by Pas Akum or are we Machmer by Pas Akum? Amar Rav Mana, that the first is correct, the second is wrong. You know why? Because whenever we use this expression, which is rare, of imum, there's a law that's obscure, they always or only use it by a leniency, never by a stringency, never. V'yesh imum le'isur, there's no such a thing. Look at the last line of the Rasha Ilio. The imum le'isur bitmiya, v'haloi, damei l'sha'ara de le'el. Bottom line is the Yerushalmi is compiling the halacha shel imum. There's only 4. We'll see, there might only be 3, but let's go with the 4. They all have to be consistent. Just like all of the 3 that we haven't had until now. The case of the Mishnah where the money is mutter. The case of Meiser Sheni where the guy could partake of the food because he didn't say the word lechalik. You can borrow, it's a halva. You can borrow wine and you're not giving back that wine and it's okay. We're not goizer. Lekula. Doesn't make sense that it should be lechumra. Gavaldik. And as we'll see, Rav Mana stands his ground, and by the way, that's the same askana in the Bavli, and that's the halacha. First of all, upas loy kitavshili akomu. Let's understand. Why should bread not be like bishul akum? By the way, they were both made for the same purpose of preventing assimilation. It's called mishum chasnus. What is the point? What are we trying to say by that? That kach anu oimrim, just like by bishul akum, second time today this expression. B'makim shetavshili Yisrael eino mitzuyim sham, b'din hu shoyet tavshili akum mutarim. By bishul akum, guys, cooked food, people have to eat. I know that bread, you can argue, is the most staple food. True, but bread you have to eat. Logically, the Gemara is arguing they should have been the same, which is that at least where there's no other bishul Yisrael, be lenient and allow bishul akum. But that was not said. Ve'imamu aleim va'asuram. They did asur it. Ve'imam aleim va'asuram. Look inside the Rasha Ilio. Bitmiya. By bishul akum, whenever they're machmer, we never use the words imum. Why not? I'll tell you why not. Because they had a concern of chasnus. The only way to prevent chasnus is to say you can't get it from them, period. We don't even view it as a chumrah. We view it as that was the ikar adin. Which means that by Pas Yisrael, me'ikar adin, if not for the imum, what should have been is, it's always asur. Now, what happened was, we know that people did not accept it. In other words, it's either all or nothing. By Pas Yisrael, we don't find a differentiation whether you do have other food, whether you don't have Yisrael food. By Pas Akum, there should be also no differentiation. What is obscure? Even if you want to be more lenient because people were more lenient because they needed to, they were only more lenient. They were more lenient. That is where they didn't accept it. And that is where the line should have been drawn. In other words, bishul is not as staple as bread. Bishul akum, guys, is always asur. Pas akum should have been one notch down. That's not imum. That makes sense. People didn't accept it. They only when did people not accept it? When there was no kosher bakery. When there was Pas Yisrael Mitzruya, in the times of Chazal, people accepted it. That's why he said imamu, that it's obscure. They didn't need to allow it to go all the way lenient, but they let it go all the way lenient. The imamu maleh vehitirua, they allowed it completely. Because since they found bread to be what we call chaya nefesh, you can eat Pas Akum even in a city where you can get Pas Yisrael. So we clarified what the imamu means. Now, says the Gemara, Rabbanan de Keisanim, in the name of Rabbi Yaakov Baracha, says, Paskins, Kedivrei Mishu Hu Matir, like this understanding, not like the Gemara's kasha, like Rav Mana, imamu means that we are allowed to have.
You're saying even when the bread of juice is available, it seems like saying here that it's only when the bread of juice is not available. That's what it says.
Okay, I take back what I said. I stand correct. I stand corrected. Oh, very good, very good, very good, very good, very good. So we have over here, okay, very good. We have two understandings. We have Rabbi Yosei and we have Rav Mana. Rabbi Yosei holds that if Imam Mu'alel means that you are allowed to have pas of a goy even when you have available bread. Rav Mana, the Gemara now says no. The Imam Mu'alel means that they allowed it to be one notch lower than bishul. So now we have two, very good. We have a machloikis in Amoraim in the Yerushalmi. How lenient can you be? That Rabbanan de Kesarin is actually more machmer. More machmer. They hold that you can only have it if Jewish bread is not available. There are three options, guys. Imamo would mean that they were completely machmer. Even though people didn't accept it, they said you can't have it. Option number two, Rabbi Yosei say, no. You can have pasakum. You can have it even when there's pas Yisrael Mitzuya. And then Rav Mana holds is somewhere in between. Imamu means lenient, but they went down a notch. By Bishul Yisrael, they didn't allow any time. If there's no kosher food available that's Bishul Yisrael, don't eat. Don't eat Bishul. By pas, they allowed. And you can argue the same thing, but Imamu. They were Chaya Nefesh. There's no real logical difference between them, only that bread is more staple. Rabbanan de Kesarin paskin like Rav Mana. Aber v'lo yavdin kain. V'lo yavdin kain means, look inside the Pnei Moshe, that people are noyig like Rabbi Yosei. Danny, that's the bottom line in the Yerushalmi. Look inside the third line under the Gemara in the Pnei Moshe. Loy no hagu kach like Rabbanan de Kesarin. That only allowed the leniency when pas Yisrael is not Mitzuya. Elo nehagin beheter af. One second. I skipped a line. Ubavad ben apaltet. When are you allowed to buy bread from a goy, even when you have pas Yisrael Mitzuya, only for buying it from a baker, not from a balabayas? And on that, the Gemara says, V'lo yavden kain. V'lo yavden kain means, that's the Pnei Moshe, that no, when there's no pas Yisrael Mitzuya, you can even get it from a balabayas. You don't have to get it only from a baker. Of them came, they were even more makel. Says the Pnei Moshe, they were even more makel.
Rabbi, Bishul Akum was also for intermarriage.
The Rabbanan of Caesarea.
Very good.
From a professional baker. But the other thing is even from a home baker.
1 second, and both of them hold the way we're learning the Gemara, not like Rabbi Yosei. Rabbi Yossi holds that even b'makim shepas Yisrael Mitzuya, really you should not have been allowed to buy pas of the goyim, but ve'imamu aleh v'hitirua means that you can even get it b'makim shepas Yisrael Mitzuya. It's a very big.
That sounds like hitiru. What's imamu? I don't understand the logic.
Okay, first of all, the imamu imamu is likula. Yeah, it's getting late. Two things, Yakir. Really, pas akum should be like bishul akum. Just like by Bishul Akum, we never differentiated. Do you have other stews available? Do you have other Bishul available? We never say that. You can't. Imamu means that they were lenient. And that leniency is something that one can argue against, but they allowed it slide. The whole thing is midrabanan, and they allowed it slide. The question now is, how far lenient? So there's two questions. Rabbi, can you even get it when you have a kosher bread, like in a lake? Can you buy pas akum? That's number one. Number two, whenever you can buy it, is it only from a paltir or even from a balabayit? These are the two things. I would say that practically today, I don't see how you can buy it from a balabayis and there shouldn't be a kashrus issue. Unlike in a bakery. In a bakery, like I told you, you have bakeries, you have big bakeries, and they have ovens that are designated only to make bread. And like in Brazil, they only made pãozinho and that. There's one bread, and it's a public thing. Here it makes sense. Everything is kosher. When you go into a person's home, how do you know that the tray upon which they're putting the bread didn't have some residue of chazal? You don't know that. And furthermore, even the oil, I'm saying, I don't see how practical it is to have pas akum of a balabayit because of kashrus. Kashrus is midoiraisa. Don't forget, we're only speaking about where the concern is not ingredients. Halachically, you know it's good. However, that works only because of the very fact that a goy was involved in the baking from the beginning until the end.
House and Danny made bread or something.
That's a different possible heter. Some say that if it's made in your house, then the whole cosmos issue.
I really hope so. So Danny is saying over here, Gavaldik, I think, because the biggest challenge that we all have in our kitchens, I think even more than basa b'cholov, is pas bishalakum because the goy make food there.
Housekeeper made eggs for your kids.
Housekeeper made eggs, very good. So the Gabbai is mentioning that there are some opinions in halacha which makes sense that say it's not shayach chasnus when they're making it with your ingredients in your house. Okay.
Right, how is chasnus involved outside the house? You're not meeting anyone, or is that the only reason bishul akum is done?
So, Kevan, I know that today everything is commercialized in a way that never existed in the times of Chazal. I know that.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, the rule is when the Chachamim make a Gezeda, the Gezeda stands. And for you to undo it, you have to have a convention of another Sanhedrin, and they have to be generally greater b'chachma b'miyan. We don't have the legal ability to undo it. Even if you were to accept that the only reason is chasnus, maybe there are other reasons, and that reason doesn't apply. But I understand how even today, if someone makes something in their home, potlucks, when people start exchanging food, the type of socialization and fellowship that is created around food is something special.
Right.
And that's it. That's the final boundary. That's the final boundary. If that boundary is not taken away, if not for anti-Semitism, there's a horrible amount of assimilation.
By the way, we didn't mention what's called available versus not available. I remember learning once, it's like something like if you're more than 2 miles, then you have to turn around and go back and get the bread, the kosher bread from the Jew, as opposed to something like that. Like there's an actual measurement that's called available if it's within that radius.
Okay, very good. What does available mean? I know by mayim, by washing before hamaitzi, that I remember the dinim of lefanav, la'achrav, traveling, 4 mil, 1 mil. The same concept is over here. I know one thing. When I lived in Hong Kong, the Rav there was Rabbi Yitzchak Groner of blessed memory. This is in 1992 and 1993. And there was in the Jewish club, they would bake bread for Shabbos. But for the week, there wasn't bread in Hong Kong then at all. And Rabbi Groner told us to get Lender's bagels, if you think there's some OU bagel, but to toast it. You see, toasting it, some opinions hold that for the Ashkenazim, that as long as a Jew did, even by the Sfardim here, if a Jew did something beneficial, advantageous to it, even though it's edible without it, but you should eat it toasted. Now that was a heter that he gave us, the shluchim there, because there was no bread. And that was based on the premise that you have to eat bread. Now, if he would have been alive today they're telling you that all of the illnesses in the world come from bread. If you don't eat bread, you won't even get COVID, garnished. Don't eat bread. I don't know. Maybe that changed. It's a new world. Okay, now let's go back to the Mishnah. All of this began, when the Gemara asked, what's the difference in the ratio? If I turn back to Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, if you tell the worker, hey, look, the Gemara asked, Ma Bain, what's the difference? So that's how it began. That Rabbi Oven b'Shem Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina mahalacha shel imum. In other words, I know we explained it. Are you paying for the food? Or are you paying for the labor? But the Gemara did not find this to be a real answer that is defendable. But we want to be lenient. Hold on. Again, Shvius, how are you living? But Shvius is Manazaz Midrabanan. I want to say based on that. The Shlakish argues with that. The Shlakish says this is not halacha shel imam. It makes perfect sense because you're missing something in the Mishnah. What are you missing in the Mishnah? The Reisha of the Mishnah, where we interpret the payment of the Isser not for the vegetable. The payment of the Isser is only for the labor. That's because in addition to telling him the words that Heilach Isser or Lokoit Liyarek Hayoim, you tell him b'mara loy es hakelach or b'mara loy es hayorek. You actually show exactly where he should pick it from. In other words, the only thing he needs to do is work. Even though working, you work where you pick with your hands, you're working with your feet. The Gemara's expression is she'enoi elo kenois loischar ragloi. No, it's once the balabais, Reuven and Shimon, once Reuven shows Shimon exactly which vegetables to pick, all Shimon has to do is walk over there and pick the vegetables. Reish Lakish sees that you're paying him for the work. He's not doing anything other than that. No, it's when in the safe of the Mishnah, according to Reish Lakish, it's that he doesn't show him where to pick it from. All he tells him is, I'm giving you an Isser. Doesn't tell him where. There is where we understand that what the worker really needs to do is Shimon has to give him an Isser worth of vegetables. Here's an Isser, get me vegetables. It's as if he's paying for the vegetables. The moment he shows him where to pick it from, that's Reish Lakish. Says that's the big difference. Now, the chiddush of Reish Lakish is that the Mishnah didn't say that he was b'mara loyes hayorik, like it's almost ikar chasim and a sefer. That doesn't bother Reish Lakish. Rabbeinu HaKadosh has many other things in view, the nichlal and the holy words of the Mishnah, and that we have to know Baal Peh what he meant. Rabbi Yochanan argues with him. He says it's not true. That in the reisha of the Mishnah, in the case where it's mutter, is afilu loy heroloi, even though he didn't show him where to do it, it's still kimisha heroloi. Very good. And he explains why. Why does he argue with Reish Lakish? Not because the Mishnah didn't say the words. The Marafulda has an innovative thought. Look inside the end of the Amid, second to last line. Why? Because Shvius, everything is hefker. When I ask Shimon, I say, Reuven, Shimon, can you get me vegetables? I don't have to show Shimon from where, because everything belongs to everyone. The Shvius hefker he. In other words, I'll tell you better. Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Reish Lakish, the way I understand the Gemara, against Rabbi Oven b'shem Rabbi Yossi. He doesn't agree that this is mahalacha shel imum. He says that shviyas, when I tell a person to get me vegetables, since he can get it from anywhere, I'm paying him for his labor. Even though the chiddush is, even though that guy is not going to work for me the whole day, he won't do that. He's only going to pick for me vegetables that he approximates to be worth of an Isser. Isser is a very small amount of money. No one works a day for an Isser. That's the whole chiddush of all of this. But still, it's Keilu Heroloi. And now the Gemara is going to bring two braises. We're going to learn other halachas that are very similar in different areas. One of them will apparently contradict Reish Lakish. The Gemara is going to answer Reish Lakish. And the other one will apparently contradict Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara is going to find M for Rabbi Yochanan. So at the end, their argument will stand. So let's begin. So at the end of a Samach Talmud, first, the Gemara attacks Reish Lakish. Masnisa, I have a brayse that appears to be pligal Reish Lakish. Daf Samach Daled Amud Beis. Now, what is the brayse talking about? This is such a relevant halacha, guys. What we're learning now is so relevant. And let me go like this. I want to know if I pay someone, not I pay, I commit to pay. I hire someone, I'm hiring a worker, and I'm telling him clearly, I need for you to bring wine for someone who's ill. Or I need for you to bring an apple for someone who's ill. Right? Eat an apple a day, keep the doctor away. That's what I was told. Now, first of all, what happens, Bachlal, if by the time the worker got back, the choila died, God forbid, better. The choila got better. That for sure is never a justification not to pay the worker in that direction. Because even though I told him the reason, and even though my reason is not here anymore, the employer, can never argue, well, I paid you to bring a yayin l'choila. He's not a choila. Can't do that. That I can't do. So if he does the job, the chiddush of the brayse that's unspoken is, even if it's not needed, that's not the problem of Shimon, of the worker. That's one thing. Now, I want to go in the other direction. The other direction is, what happens if the worker went and he couldn't find it? That's where it gets sticky. I hire a worker, do something, he exerted all the effort. He was a lo yutzlach, and now he wants to get paid. You see, that's the premise of many din Toiras. Each side feels that they're right. I paid you to bring yayin, you didn't bring the wine. The guy says, no, I did everything that was needed to bring the yayin. Happened to be that when I got there was no barcodes on the wine. So I couldn't get it. That's not on me, that's on someone in Mexico that forgot to put on the barcodes. Verstehst? V'im lav ein chayv litin loy. means, now the imlai b'chayil means, but if, that's the chiddush, if the worker did all of the effort, he exerted all of the effort, time and effort, else, if he didn't bring it, the guy says, I paid you to bring it, this is big, but, now listen to the nuance. Look at the Gavaldik, Chazal. These are the Yesoides. If he tells the worker, same thing, Yayin l'chayla, but the Reuven tells Shimon where to bring it from. Mimak and Pliny, bring tapuach l'chayla, mimak and Pliny, and the same place, same thing. The guy went, he spent, and he went to that place. If he didn't bring it, it's because that place didn't have it. The premise is chayev litan loy. Because the question is, when Reuven hired Shimon for money, is he paying for the product or is he paying for the labor? It's very similar to our Mishnah. So the Baraisa is saying that when he's Mara Makim means a city, not a house. That will be the kasha against Reish Lakish. Then he's paying for the labor, even though he didn't tell him which house. And that will be the kasha against Reish Lakish that you see from that Baraisa, that when you hire someone, you're paying for their labor, even without showing him the exact patch from where to pick it. Why? So ma'avad Reish Lakish. Right, you would think it's a raya to Reish Lakish. The Gemara is saying it's a kasha to Reish Lakish because he didn't tell him what house. He didn't tell him exactly from where. He gave him a general area. He was not shown a specific product. Unlike Reish Lakish's insistence that he pointed to the vegetables, these vegetables. So the Reish Lakish will say, no, that is the case of the Braisa. Simple way out. Pasar law, he'll interpret that Braisa that yes, b'maroloi. When are you chayv to pay, even though the guy didn't bring it back? When you told him, I want you to go to that makom and to go to that house, to go to that market, you have to be very specific. When you're very specific, then the worker can say, I did exactly what you said. You're not paying for the wine. If not, I could have bought wine from next door. You wanted wine from there. The effort I made. There you get paid for your effort because you were hired for your labor. He did the labor. You know, when we say by Yasiyum, and we are proud, and we should be proud, that Anam Amelim Mehem Amelim. Right? So the pshat is that in the world, generally, you don't get paid for your work. You get paid for your results. Here you see Gavaldik, a detail of that, even legally. When you're told to do something very specific, even in the world, you get paid for your labor. That's why the mitzvahs are so specific. God did not tell us, be nice people. Verstehst? God told us, Beracha bitcha ktana, with all of the detail of halachas. You lit the fire, you didn't light the fire, you put the match in, you didn't put the match in. That's why we get paid for our effort. Right. Next, it's late. Masnisa, now in the other direction. There's another Braisa that appears to contradict Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan does not differentiate. What's the Braisa over there? The Tani we learned in the Braisa. Let me speak about, guys, remember leket? Remember peah? A rich man is not allowed to pick it for himself. A poor man who picks it for the poor man is allowed to sell it to the rich man. Why not? Fakert, he can sell it. What happens if a rich man is telling the poor man to go pick it and he's paying him? If we view he hired, if he's paying for the product, that's okay. Why is that okay? Because that means the poor man picked up the product and he's paying for the product. If he's paying him for the labor, a poor man cannot pick it for the usher because the usher cannot pick it for himself. Here it's in the other direction. So how do we view that payment, labor or product? So says the Braisa, meaning an usher to an ani, hey, dinar zeh, take this dinar, v'havi li leket hayoim, or havi li peya hayoim. You cannot do that because that implies that he's paying him for the labor. He's paying for that. Now, paying like our Mishnah, right? He's paying for the labor. By leket, it's a problem paying for the labor. Why is that? Because then he can't take the food. Because the ani's machshav is, I'm getting paid for my labor. What I'm picking is for my owner. You can't pick that for the owner. It's matnas aniyim. What could he say? For that, I'm paying you in advance. I'm buying. I'm paying you in advance for whatever you'll pick today. And Ben Levi, when it comes to Ma'aser Rishon, same idea. Okay. In other words, very good. Now here, fragt the Gemara against Rabbi Yechanan, v'harei loy heroloi. In other words, the reason why a rich man can tell him in the Sefer, b'leket shetaveli hayoim, right, is because we view him to be prepaying. At all, he didn't show him anything, which implies that if the rich man would have showed the poor man which field to collect it from, then we would view him as an employee. Answers the Gemara, coming back. That's a doiraisa, guys. Leket and peya is an isur doiraisa, is a din doiraisa. And therefore, there's no room for leniency. As long as it's not clear that he's prepaying, it will always be prohibited. Over here, since Shvius is midrabanan, like we explained, because Shvius is connected to Yovel. Yovel is connected bisman shekol yishvel, and we didn't have it bisman by Yesheni. So the whole thing was midrabanan, and let's go back. That's the pshat of halacha shel imum. So they were lenient. And according to Rabbi Yechanan, they were so lenient, like we learned in the Marafulda, he agrees with Reish Lakish, the concept of, he showed him where to pick it from. Showed him where to pick it from. It's only labor. Rabbi Yechanan says, even though he didn't show him, it's as if he showed him. Because everything is hefked. But all of that is only because it's a concept, it's a dinim derabanan, to be continued.